To the outside world, my father was the kind of man other men wanted to be. His name appeared on the side of 3 commercial real estate towers in downtown Nashville. His face showed up in Tennessee Business Quarterly twice before I turned 16. He drove a black Escalade with tinted windows and shook hands the way politicians do, firm, 2 pumps, eye contact smile that never quite reached his eyes. I was his only son, and for a long time I thought that meant something. The night everything ended, I was 22 years old. I had just gotten home from my shift at the hardware store, not because I needed the money, but because my uncle had suggested it, said it would build character, and I trusted him more than I trusted anyone. It was a Tuesday in March, still cold enough that my breath fogged on the front porch. I remember the exact temperature because the outdoor thermometer read 34 degrees, and I stood there for a second, thinking about how the whole world felt like it was 1 degree away from freezing solid. I walked into the kitchen, and my father was already at the table. No dinner, no TV in the background, just him, sitting in the dark, with a manila folder in front of him. He didn't look up when I came in. "Sit down," he said. I pulled out the chair across from him. The folder stayed between us like a piece of evidence. "I know what you've been doing," he said. I didn't know what he meant. I asked him to explain. He slid 1 sheet of paper across the table. It was a printout of an email, one I had sent to my uncle 3 weeks earlier. In it, I had asked my uncle for advice about some financial discrepancies I'd noticed in the documents my father had asked me to file the previous summer. I was studying accounting at Vanderbilt at the time. I had only noticed the numbers by accident. I had only asked my uncle because I didn't know who else to trust. "You went around me," my father said. "I was confused about the numbers. I wasn't accusing you of anything. You questioned me." He said it like those were the same thing. I tried to explain. He cut me off before I got 3 sentences in. What happened over the next 40 minutes I have replayed so many times that the edges of the memory have gone smooth, like sea glass. He told me I had betrayed his trust. He told me I was naive and that I didn't understand how business worked. He told me that if I couldn't be loyal to the family, I had no place in it. He used the word disloyal 4 times. I counted. At the end of it, he pushed another piece of paper across the table. It was a letter already signed. It stated that I was being removed from his will, removed from any role in Harlan Property Group, and that I had 2 weeks to vacate the house. "You're not a Harlan anymore," he said. "Not in any way that matters." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up my jacket off the back of the chair, and I walked to my car, and I sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens for an hour because I didn't know where else to go. My uncle called me at 10:30 that night. His name was Douglas, though everyone called him by his last name, Sutter. He was my mother's brother, the only blood on her side I had left after she passed from cancer when I was 14. He was 61 years old, retired, and lived alone on a property he'd bought decades ago in the hill country outside of Cookeville, a spread of land with a farmhouse, a barn, and out past the tree line, a secondary structure he'd built himself and never let anyone inside. "I heard what happened," he said. "Did you tell him about the email?" "No. He has someone watching his communications, has for years." A pause. "I'm sorry, son, I should have warned you better. I told him I needed a place to stay. He told me to come, and I drove the 2 hours that night with everything I owned in 2 duffel bags in the back seat. I stayed with Sutter for 3 weeks. He didn't ask many questions. He made coffee before I was up in the morning and left it on the counter. He let me decompress. But I could tell there was something on his mind, something he was working up to, and I didn't push him on it, because the whole situation already had a fragility to it that I didn't want to break. On a Saturday morning, the 23rd day I was there, he set 2 cups on the kitchen table and sat down across from me and folded his hands the way you fold your hands when you're about to say something you've been rehearsing. "I need to tell you something I probably should have told you a long time ago," he said. He told me the truth about my father's business. Harlan Property Group was not simply a real estate company. Over the past decade, my father had used it as a vehicle for something much darker, a series of shell companies that funneled money from investors, primarily retirees in Middle Tennessee, into projects that existed mostly on paper. The real money was being siphoned out through a network of LLCs and paid out to a small inner circle. Some of those investors had lost everything. One family in Murfreesboro had lost their entire retirement savings, nearly $400,000. There were others. My uncle had known about it for almost 4 years. He had been quietly collecting documentation, wire transfer records, emails, a recorded phone call, internal memos, because he had been building a case. But he had no way to move on it without someone on the inside, someone with standing, someone whose testimony and access couldn't be dismissed. He looked at me across the table. "That email you sent me," he said. "The one about the discrepancies. You saw it too. You just didn't know what you were looking at." "I wasn't trying to. I know," he said. "But you're standing now. You were an insider. He removed you. You have nothing left to protect." I sat with that for a long time. Then I asked him where he kept the documentation. He had a structure on his property he called the workshop. A low concrete building out past the tree line that he'd built to store equipment when he was still farming the land, before his knees gave out. The door had a padlock on it that I'd never seen him open. He'd built the walls himself, poured the floor himself, and as far as I knew, no one had ever been inside except him. We walked out there the next morning, through the frost-bitten grass, past the bare sweet gum trees, along the rutted gravel path. He worked the combination on the padlock for a second. 7/14/6, my mother's birthday, and pushed the door open. It was not a workshop. The inside had been converted into something closer to a file room. Metal shelving along 3 walls, banker's boxes stacked in labeled rows, a folding table with a laptop on it, a battery backup system in the corner. On the far wall, bolted to the concrete, was a fireproof document safe, the kind you'd see in a law office. "How long have you been building this?" I said. "Since your father bought his second property with someone else's retirement money," he said. "About 6 years. He unlocked the safe with a key from his pocket. Inside were 2 external hard drives and 3 bound folders, the kind with the elastic straps. He laid them on the table. I documented everything I could access without crossing a legal line," he said. "But there are gaps, things I couldn't get to from the outside." He looked at me. "You worked in his office for 2 summers. You filed his documents. You know his systems." "I know his filing codes," I said. "I know how he organized his records." That's enough to bridge the gaps. We spent the next 6 days at that folding table. He had printed ledgers and digital records, and a timeline he'd built from cross-referencing transaction dates. I had my memory of the internal filing system, the shorthand codes my father used, the naming conventions for his LLC documents, the folder structure on his cloud server, which I still had access to because no one had thought to revoke it. I pulled everything I could reach and cross-matched it against what my uncle had assembled. What we built over those 6 days was a complete picture. The scheme involved 14 LLCs across 3 states. The total amount of investor money that had been misappropriated over a 9-year period was just under $11 million. There were 83 identified victims, most of them retirees between the ages of 60 and 78. The inner circle consisted of my father, 2 of his business partners, and a private accountant in Brentwood named Whitfield, who had structured the entities. On the 7th morning, my uncle called a number he had saved in his phone for 3 years without dialing it. It belonged to a white-collar fraud attorney in Nashville named Brewer. We drove in to meet her that afternoon. I sat across the desk from her in my uncle's barn coat and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. At the end of it, she looked at both of us and said, "This is the most complete pre-litigation case I've seen walk through my door in 15 years." She filed a referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division within the week. What happened over the next 8 months is difficult to compress into a short telling. There were depositions. There were meetings with federal investigators. There were moments in the middle of the night when I lay in the dark in my uncle's spare bedroom, wondering if I had done the right thing, and moments in the morning when I looked at the face of a retired schoolteacher from Gallatin, who had lost her savings and knew, without question, that I had. My father found out we had gone to authorities when his attorney called him. He called me twice. I didn't pick up. He sent a letter through a courier, which I didn't open. The indictment came down on a Thursday in November. I found out from the news alert on my phone. Harlan Property Group CEO indicted on federal wire fraud and securities fraud charges. 14 counts. His two partners were named in the same filing. Whitfield, the accountant, had already agreed to cooperate. The day the verdict came in, guilty on 11 of 14 counts, I was sitting in my uncle's kitchen eating leftover chili. My phone buzzed. I read the screen. I set it face down on the table. My uncle was looking at me from across the room. "It's done," I said. He nodded once. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. My father was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Under federal guidelines, he would serve at least 10. His assets were frozen pending restitution proceedings. The property towers with his name on them were sold at court order. The Investors' Restitution Fund was established with a court-appointed administrator, and while no one recovered everything they had lost, the 83 victims each received a substantial portion of what had been taken from them. There was a whistleblower protection filing attached to my cooperation agreement. The compensation that came from it covered 2 years of law school. I thought about my name for a long time after it was over. Harlan had never meant what I thought it meant. It was a brand my father had built and used, a thing he put on buildings and business cards and his son's birth certificate because it made him look like a legacy. It wasn't a family, it was a logo. I filed the legal name change paperwork in the spring. I took my mother's maiden name, Sutter, the same as my uncle's, the same as the man who had kept a 6-year file in a concrete building in the hill country and waited for someone with the standing to use it. The morning the name change was finalized, my uncle drove into town, and we had breakfast at a diner on the square in Cookville. He ordered eggs over easy and black coffee and a side of biscuits because he always ordered biscuits even when he said he wasn't hungry. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. At some point I looked at the receipt the waitress had left on the table, and she had written Sutter, party of 2 in pencil at the top. I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket, and I kept it. My father built his name by taking from people who trusted him. I rebuilt mine by standing with the one person who never stopped believing the truth was worth the cost of telling it. There are 83 families in Middle Tennessee who got some of their future back. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything.